In this video, I'm going to share with you my absolute #1 tip for actually getting minis painted up and onto the gaming table. Now, it might not come as a surprise to most people, but the #1 tip is to have fun, or to at least enjoy that hobbying part of it. And obviously, that's easier said than done a lot of the time, especially when you've got a whole horde of grey plastic in front of you, and you're just trying to figure out, how the hell you actually get through this horde. So I'll share with you a couple of the tips that I've got to help you actually accomplish that, and maybe a few things to stop doing and a few things maybe to start doing. Now, this is one of those things that has always kind of been in the back of my mind, but it recently really hit home when I started off on a new project, and I ended up with loads of Space Marines sat in front of me, and basically I've been banking all of these Marines and these old tanks that I dug out as well, and also some of these new ones that I'd ended up picking up, and I figured I'd make a video about making all of these retro and making them all fit in with my other stuff. And by the time I started getting onto the edge highlight and everything, it became a bit of a chore, and I realized actually I'm not enjoying this as much as I should. So I threw caution to the wind, I stopped filming that video, and I just let myself enjoy it. And there's a few things that I did to make that actually happen. The first one, and this isn't something that I did with this project, but if you are not enjoying a mini, or if you're not enjoying a project, move on to something else. There's nothing better than picking up something that you actually want to paint that then rejuvenates you and gets your creative juices flowing. When you're working on something that you're just not enjoying, it becomes a chore, and then that just rolls over into the rest of the hobby, and it just makes you just not want to pick up the paintbrush, which is obviously one of the worst things that can happen when it comes to your painting experience. There's no harm and there's no shame in moving away from a project unless you've got something that absolutely ties you to it, and ultimately you can go back to that project maybe when you're a little bit more reinvigorated, or you actually want to do it, and worst case scenario, you either never get around to it or you sell it and move on. The next tip to help you have a little bit more fun is do the techniques that you're comfortable with, even if they are by all accounts like a newbie technique. I think we've all got this drive in the hobby to get better and better and better. And yeah, it's definitely something that you want to be striving for. You always want to try and improve yourself over the last model that you painted. But sometimes you can just get to the stage where actually I don't want to sit down and try and do loads and loads of wet blending and to get those really, really smooth highlights and blends from dark to bright. I just want to grab my dry brush. And there's always inevitably going to be somebody out there who sits and goes, no, dry brushing, it's like a newbie technique and people shouldn't be doing it. But some people can get some amazing results with a dry brush, and I'm not one of them, but I love dry brushing. This really hit me when I was painting up all of my Space Marines. I did all of my airbrushing, and then I did some of the next stages, and then I got onto the edge highlighting of the power armor, which is really nice, but not when you're doing like 15 units and 3 tanks and loads of other things. Started edge highlighting, I looked at the horde in front of me and realized I was going to go crazy. So I grabbed my dry brush and I basically dry brushed all of the basic unit, and then I edge highlighted my 2 sergeants for them. And that took a whole load off and let me have a lot of fun with this project. Also, bear in mind, if you do something like that, you can always come back in later on. With these Space Marines, for example, I've come back in and pretty much every night ended up edge highlighting one of them just to bring up some of those highlights. And I'll continue to do that until I pretty much get the whole unit done. There's no harm in getting a project up to like a tabletop standard so that we can play with them, their intended use, and then come back later and make some of them look even better than you did beforehand. Another way to have a little bit more fun is don't put so much pressure on yourself as well. In this day and age of social media and things like YouTube as well, where we see these final results, we have a habit of looking at those and comparing ourselves and go, oh my God, those are some great, look at those smooth blends and look at those colors. How did they even get there? That's incredible. And then you look at your new model that you were just moments ago really happy with and go, well, this looks like utter crap. Stop doing that. Compare yourself to your last model, but not to somebody else's model. Look to other people for, I don't know, a little bit of inspiration and learning and everything else. But guess what? Everybody on YouTube and everybody who's doing painting guides or who's won a golden demon or who's a pro painter, they also make mistakes. But the problem is, all we tend to see is that final result. So we look at that and go, wow, that's incredible. And I'm never going to get there. Or I make too many mistakes and all of that. But ultimately, these people make mistakes as well, and they learn from those and they grow from those. So don't put so much pressure on yourself. And speaking of pressure, try to avoid doing so much in one go. There's nothing more tempting than hitting that buy button on the big box set that comes out, or just buying up a whole host of different plastic, or 3D printing far too much. I know that too well. Those things down there are awful, awful miniature traps that end up printing off far too much. And then suddenly you end up with like 100 units in front of you, and you then got to figure out where the hell do you start with that? Like with my Space Marines, for example, it makes sense for me to do a big batch painting of them because I can do all of the base layers with the airbrush. But that means I've then got to try to commit to doing like 20, 30, 40 units, maybe a few tanks all at the same go, and it just becomes too daunting. So try to keep it in bite-sized chunks and only buy what you need or print what you need. It just makes it so much easier to manage, and it stops leaving you feeling overwhelmed with all the miniatures you've got to paint. And perhaps the final thing, if you're here for things like Warhammer or tabletop gaming or Dungeons and Dragons, try to get a few games in, whether or not that's just with some friends, maybe your spouse, maybe your kids. Get a few games in there, because that helps you to remember that actually the reason you are painting up your armies or your miniatures is most likely to get on the gaming table and have some fun with them. And it really, really helps to keep that end goal in mind, because when you're going through that and you hit that chunk of time where you're going, I don't like the way my model looks, and I'm really not enjoying this, it helps you sometimes just to push through and remember, actually, this model is Sir Bolds-a-Lot, and he's going to slay some orcs when he gets on that table. So try to remember that, have a bit of fun, and do a little bit of gaming. So it might be a really basic tip to have fun with your painting, but I just think in this day and age, there's so much pressure on people to paint to this golden standard and to put out like 100 miniatures all in one go, because that's what you're seeing on YouTube. You know, people watch my videos and go, how do you paint so much so quickly? And say, well, a lot of that is like tabletop standard. And the great thing about the stuff that I paint is that I have the power of this thing in front of me, the camera, so I get to choose the shots that you guys see. So obviously I make mistakes as well. So in this day and age of tech and cameras and editing and movie magic and everything else, it can be really hard to look at people and go, oh my God, they paint so much, they paint so well, and it really makes you feel deflated. So just have fun with your projects. You can learn a little bit more and push yourself out of your comfort zone. But if something isn't working for you and you don't like a technique, you don't have to do it just because everybody else seems to be doing it. Do what makes you comfortable and go from there. So I hope that video has helped. Hit the like and subscribe button. Come along for some more content. You've got all sorts coming up, but above all, have fun with your painting. I'll see you soon. Bye.